So we're going to learn a letter that the Rebbe sent the 11th of Nissan, 1965, Tashin Chafei, addressed to the sons and daughters of Israel, all Jewish people. And it's a very, very fascinating letter. It really tells us a lot about who we are and what our life is about. Let's go right to it. Baruch Hashem Yalchus, Brooklyn, New York, to the sons and daughters of Israel, wherever they are, God bless you all. Greetings and blessings. God set the time for the Exodus from Egypt to be in the springtime. And the Torah commands us to make sure that Passover will always fall out in the springtime. As it says in the Torah, guard the month of the springtime and make the holiday of Pesach for Hashem your God, because in the month of the spring, God redeemed you from Egypt at night. So that's important to do every year, to make sure that Passover is in the springtime. But in order to assure that Passover will be in the springtime, our calendar is set according to the moon. So the lunar calendar is an 11-day difference. It's 11 days shorter than the solar calendar. It's 354 days, not 365. So in order to attune our calendar, to sync our calendar to the solar calendar so that Passover will always be in the springtime, every few years, 2 or 3 years, we have an additional month, like this year, the month of Adar, extra Adar, so that the lunar calendar and the solar calendar are synced, and the holiday of Passover always falls out in the springtime. And as a result of this, all the months of the year and all the holidays are set in their exact time based upon this. So it almost seems to me that Hashem is saying, as long as Passover is in the springtime, you could figure it out after that. This is the center of the calendar. I want you to think about time based upon the fact that Passover is in the springtime. I'm going to see how this idea of Passover being in the spring is so central to who we are and where we're going. The fact that Passover, the Exodus from Egypt, happened in the spring is explained by our sages as a special kindness by God. God took us out of Egypt in the most successful time of the year. In the best time, it's not too hot, not too cold. The Talmud says God took out the imprisoned ones in a kosher month, in a month that's not too hot, not too cold, a month of spring. But, the Rebbe continues, everything in Torah has also within it hints and explanations, instructions for the Jewish people as a whole, and for every individual. So one of the points the Rebbe says that I want to highlight will become clear, will be clarified after meditating into the conditions in which the Exodus happened. By thinking about the conditions, the circumstances in which the Exodus happened, we'll be able to better understand the meaning of Passover being the springtime, the deeper reason. For hundreds of years, the Jewish people were enslaved to a nation that ruled over, hundreds of years, Jewish people, centuries, Jewish people were being ruled by a nation that ruled over the entire region, the entire world. As the Rebbe writes in the notes, the Mechilta says that Pari was the king of the entire world. And not only was Pari superior to the other nations with his military might, with his soldiers, with his chariots, but also Pari was a lot more advanced, both in culture and in development, period. The culture and the development of Egypt was based on the powers and phenomena of nature. Especially, it was predicated on the Nile River. Egypt is a barren land. They don't have almost any rain. And however, the innovation of mankind created this irrigation system that transformed Egypt to become a blossoming garden surrounded by desert. So their culture, their development was all based upon the powers of nature, and specifically the Nile River, and the man harnessing the Nile River to transform Egypt to being what it was, a beautiful garden, instead of what it would have been had man not harnessed the power of the Nile River, would have been a desert. So the conditions, the circumstances, these in Egypt, created a idolatrous society, which had two fundamental elements. First of all, they deified the powers of nature, number one. And number two, they deified the powers of man that was able to harness the powers of nature. From these two fundamental mistakes, there was but a small step to deifying the Pharaoh himself, who embodied for the Egyptians the perfect man. They deified the Pharaoh. They deified the Nile River. They deified the powers of nature. They deified the power of man that harnessed the powers of nature. So the Pharaoh, who was the perfect man, is therefore to them a god. It was very natural for them to deify him, considering the fact that they worship nature and they worship man's power in harnessing the forces of nature. So therefore the Pharaoh is God. So this perspective that sees the world as a composite of many forces of nature, that's what the world is. There are many forces of nature that make the world be what the world is. Among those forces are the power of man. Add to that their philosophy that it is my strength and the power of my hand that will make me successful. That brought to a spiritual descent, an ethical descent, an abysmal descent, until they were able to justify cruelly, abominably doing acts of abominable cruelty to man and to a weaker nation. So in other words, what I'm getting over here is they worship the power of man. That's what to them in their yardstick. That's good. Goodness is power. Goodness that's what's good. So if you're weak, you're bad. You're inferior. So whoever is stronger is better. And if you're not stronger, you're less you're less than, you're inferior. So whoever is stronger rules, and you're allowed to destroy anyone who's weaker than you, because you who are stronger are better. That's what their perspective was. So ruling and cruelly hurting those weaker than them was when hand in hand with their perspective of deifying the powers of man and deifying powers of nature. In other words, it's a little bit more than social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest is just whoever is nature is man's power was what will get you there, and our strength will get you there. They deified the power of man. So that means if you're not powerful, you are bad. You're low. You're inferior and deserve to be attacked. I'm just thinking, there could be an atheistic perspective, which is very similar. It's man's power, and that leads to a social Darwinistic perspective. But they were more. They weren't just denying. They deified the powers of man. They deified the powers of nature. So for them, this leads right into this cruel behavior they had, this abominable behavior towards the Jewish people and towards other people that were weaker than them. Okay, this deifying, this empty faith that they had, reached its fullest expression in the period of the year, the annual rejuvenation of the powers of nature in the month of the spring. The month of the spring is when there's an annual renewal of the powers of nature. And since the Egyptians worship nature, so when is there a full expression of their idolatry? When do they fully bow, if you will, to the powers of nature? In the month of the spring. And that is why the Egyptians worship the sheep, because the month of the spring is associated with the zodiac, the mazel of the sheep. So the sheep was the fundamental idolatry of the Egypt. That was their basic idolatry. Why? Because since they worship nature, and when is nature in its full expression? In the mazel of the sheep. Therefore, they worship the sheep. These are the circumstances. By understanding the circumstances that the Exodus took place, we'll understand more why it's so important for Passover to be in the springtime. So here comes Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu has the following in his mouth. God says, "I've remembered you. The time has come that it has become the will of God. It has arisen in God's desire, the God of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to free the children of Israel from the Pharaoh, from the exile." 210 years have already passed from the moment the Jewish people were under the jurisdiction of the Pharaoh. Many Jews have already assimilated into the culture, Egyptian culture. There's no expectancy of any help from any nations around them. No slave has yet, till that moment, been freed from Egypt. Therefore, there's no chance, looking at it from just a natural perspective, for the Jewish people to be freed from Egypt. And despite this, Moshe Rabbeinu comes, and he tells them, the time for your freedom has arrived. There's only one condition to be free. The condition is, draw yourself and take for yourself a sheep for your families and slaughter the Paschal lamb. What do those words mean? So here's the setting. Here, the setting again is Moshe Rabbeinu enters into the Jewish people's circumstances of life. They're living there for hundreds of years. There's no chance they're ever going to be freed. They're living in a culture that worships nature, and there's no natural way they're ever going to get out of this place. And yet, Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, time for freedom has come. All you need to do is slaughter the Korban Pesach. And Moshe Rabbeinu uses two words. He says, draw and take. So our sages explain, the Talmud explains, draw yourself away from the idols of the earth. Take for yourself a sheep. Imagine this. This guy is in a room he can't get out of the room. And he bangs his head against the wall. He bangs his hands against the wall. He bangs his feet against the wall. He can't get out of the wall. Can't get out of the room. He realizes he's stuck in this room forever. He's going to die in this room. His life depends on this. So what's he going to do? So he does one last ditch effort, and he slams. He runs into the wall, and he falls down on the floor. And he looks up, and he sees that on the door handle it says "pull." So this is very in sync with the instruction of Moshe Rabbeinu. Draw to yourself. What is Moshe saying? Draw yourself away from the idols of the earth. Take for yourself the sheep, which the Egyptian worship, and slaughter it as a sacrifice for Hashem. It's not sufficient, Moshe says, to deny the idolatry of the Egyptians in your heart. It's not enough that you say in your heart, I don't subscribe to their belief. It's not enough in your home, quietly and modestly, without no one seeing, that you disavow the Egyptian deities. Rather, Moshe Rabbeinu tells them in public, without any fear, according to all the details that the Torah tells us with the Paschal Lamb, got to do everything according to detail, in public. And then Moshe promises them, in the name of God, not only will you be freed from Egypt, but even Pari himself will command that you be free. He'll command you to leave Egypt. The redemption will not be in a period where the powers of nature are dormant and hidden. Rather, in the month of the spring, in the month when nature shows its greatest power. By doing this, there is the fact that there aren't two separate worlds is highlighted. It's not that there is the world of nature and the forces of nature and the world of the supernatural, and these worlds fight with each other. And sometimes one world wins, sometimes the other world wins. There's only one solitary God who is the only ruler of the world. And in him, the whole world is united. So there aren't two different worlds. By the redemption happening in the spring, that highlighted this truth that there aren't two separate worlds. I was thinking about the previous Rebbe's exchange with the KGB officer who put the pistol to his head and said to him that this toy is a way of making people speak. And the previous Rebbe responded, that toy can only frighten someone who only has one world and many gods, but to me, who I have one God and two worlds, this toy doesn't frighten me. And Rabbi Elkanah Vashalom always asked, why did the previous Rabbi have to emphasize the fact that he believes in one God? The fact he believes in two worlds is relevant, because if there's only one world, so then the pistol is supreme. But why do you have to emphasize that there's one God, not more than one God? What he was saying was that if you believe in more than one God, so then there's a time you're in the hands of the good God, times you're in the hand of the bad God, time you're in the hand of the forces of nature, times that the supernatural is victorious. And so now that he's in the office, the KGB officer, he is now stuck in the hands of the bad God. So the previous Rebbe said, I don't believe in two gods. There is only one God. And therefore, in other words, the same God that we're going to be connected and see when Mashiach comes in the Beis Hamikdash, after we're going to experience revelation of Hashem in the Beis Hamikdash, that same God is also in the office of the KGB officer. There aren't two different gods. That's the reason that God made the Passover. It's so important to our calendar that Passover be in the springtime, because the spring is a time when the forces of nature are so rejuvenated, and by making our redemption to be in the springtime, the fact that there aren't two separate worlds that fight with each other is highlighted. We could see that the redemption is happening in the time when the spring is in full bloom. And this recognition came to its full expression when we got the Torah, which was the goal, which was a destination of the Exodus. What did God begin the giving the Torah with? I am Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. You shall not have any other gods. In other words, the point of God redeeming us in the spring was in order that we should have this clear conviction that there are no other gods. There aren't two different worlds. All there is Hashem. Okay, so that's the reason why it's so critical that Passover be in the springtime, because by Passover being in the springtime, we express this holistic perspective that there's no dissonance, there's no schism. I think his name was Herbert Wiener. He wrote a book called 9.5 Mystics. In the book, he writes about his exchange with the Rebbe. He visits the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says to him, he tells the Rebbe, I see that your followers have this naive look in their eyes. And the Rebbe responded, what you don't see in their eyes is a schism, a kera, a rift, a separation, a rip. Rebbe said, it looks like you have a hard time sleeping at night because you're trying to live in two worlds, trying to shout out two worlds. You're trying to be, in the world of faith, in the world of journalism, whatever he was involved in. And that makes it hard for him to sleep at night. So when you're seeing the naive perspective, you're looking and seeing my followers, the actual you're seeing is something that's whole, it's holistic. They aren't trying to shout out two worlds. They believe in the same Eibishter, same God, who is in the world of the supernatural. He is the one who controls everything that's going on in the world, and nothing is really natural. Everything is by God's hand. So that's the theme of Passover happening in the springtime. Okay, as in Egypt in the past, so too in the present, there are some people that base their lives on deifying the so-called forces of nature, and they also add, it's the strength of my hand, the power of man that makes things happen. There are others that have this invention of saying the following. They say, at home, we have a place for God. But when we're among society, we're like everybody else. Let us be like the Gentiles, or let's be more goy than the goy. That's how they feel. They feel the power of nature is supreme, and therefore our strength and the power of our hand will make things happen. And yes, and some of them say, yeah, okay, we'll be Jewish at home, but as out in the street, in society, we have to be like the Gentiles, or more Gentile than Gentiles. Comes the holiday of Passover and reminds us once again, God tells the Jewish people, I have remembered you. You don't have a choice. God remembers you, and He obligates you to draw yourself away, from the idolatry of the world and any kind of expression that this idolatry has, and do this in public without any fear and with courage. That's what God says. I've remembered you. You're going to leave Egypt. There's nothing to talk about. Draw yourself away from the idolatry. Draw yourself away from any expression of idolatry. In other words, draw yourself away from ascribing any power to anything else other than Hashem. And what should you do instead? Take yourself. Take yourself, or more accurately, kulachem, take to yourself. What does that mean? Take yourself and everything that belongs to you and all of your possibilities and all of your strengths. Take that to your essence. Take it to your true Jewish and eternal I. In other words, what this means to me is that we have so many voices in our heads. The question is, can we differentiate between the noise and our real voice of our neshama? Take yourself to yourself. Take all the things that are going on in your life, all the opportunities that you have, all the possibilities that you have, all of these strengths that you have, everything that you're looking at that is a thing. Take that and analyze that based on your true eye. Let your neshama be the center of your life. Instead of looking at all these things with an idolatrous perspective, they have some kind of power on their own. Take your whole being and bring it to yourself. Bring it to your true Jewish eternal eye, and listen to how your neshama looks at things. That's what I was saying before about pull, not push. Pull yourself into yourself. You think that, okay, I know what the problem is. I'm only working 9 to 5. If I would work 9 to 6, things would be better. 8 to 7, things would be better. 7 to 9. It's pushing. Instead of pushing, pull. Pull yourself into yourself. Realize, listen to what your neshama says. Don't listen to this to all the idolatrous perspectives over here. Don't try to analyze things based upon what nature says, what people say. Go bring it all. Take your you and bring it to your essence, to your true I. All this you should do. Once you do all this, and this is in the springtime. What's in the springtime? People make a mistake and think the world is blossoming. In the center of the world, there's man. And this is your God. Your God is man. Man is what does stuff. You are enslaved to man, and there's no room for God. That's the world is telling you. Man is successful. The world is blossoming. It's a power of man that makes it. There's no room for God. The only thing that makes things happen is the idolatry. So the Torah tells us in the month of the spring, on the contrary, in that very month of the spring, where it looks like there's so many other things happening, all their forces, and God has no room for God in that place. In that time, in the month of the spring, the Torah tells us, God took you out of Egypt. The world, the blossoming world, and all the wonders that you see in the world bring you to have a clearer view of the truth. In the language of our sages, Hashem, our God, is the king of the world, and there's nothing missing in his world. It was, instead of looking at the world, the blossoming world, there's some other force out there, opposite. You look at the world and you feel, this is the Eibishter's world. This is the wonderful world of Hashem. Therefore, there's nothing missing here. That's what so the month of the spring is not a time of confusion that there's some other force out there, and that's what's blossoming. On the contrary, the month of the spring grants us this clear vision into the truth that everything that's going on in the world is from Hashem. And he is the one who's created this magnificent world with nothing missing in it. That concludes, may Hashem help and give success that Pesach, the time of our freedom, should bring every single one of us, among all the Jewish people, to true freedom from all disturbances and limitations, to serve God with a full heart. And from our personal redemption, this should bring the redemption of all the Jewish people, the true and complete Geulah through Mashiach, the speedily in our days, the bracha for a kosher and joyous Passover and the Rebbe's signature. So Reb Chaim Peretz, what's amazing. It's a mamish amazing.
Yeah, because it really, I mean, you can political, it's obvious its implications. People who deify nature and use that as a way of controlling men, just the opposite of what we need to do.
Right.
That's what's so prevalent today.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I was thinking that Putin and all this, I'm stronger and therefore I can.
Either that or other trade, what I say,
Oh.
or all the other system mutations.
Cancel society.
Nature,
Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
But I think besides looking at others, like, forget about others. We don't have to disturb the whole world. Look at ourselves. Like, there's times that I'm davening, I'm learning, and there is like when I go back into myself, am I frightened, or do I listen to my real eye? All right, let me go off recording. Have a great day. Good Yontif.